Carolyn, if you want to share your screen so we can check everything's working, and then I'll introduce you.
Yeah, unmute would help. Start video. Right, share screen. 2. Right. So, can you see?
I can see you.
William and Ludlam. William.
I can see you, but not.
Yeah. I've got a screen with a blue line around it. It's not showing my.
You should have the option, Carolyn, to share, and then you get a selection. And you
yes, I've got the selection up, and I've clicked on screen 2, which is the one which is supposed to be showing the PowerPoint. And I've got a bright blue line around it. So
I think that
share. Okay, that's it.
That's the one. Yes,
that's right. Yes,
there you go.
That's fine. Thank you.
That's it.
I'll move that off. Right.
Okay.
When it's a button to press, yes, it doesn't go straight through that. Okay. Got
all right. That's brilliant. I'll just introduce you, if you don't mind, and a short introduction to your presentation, if that's okay.
Okay.
Right. Well, our second presentation this afternoon is from Carolyn Bedwell, FRAS. She is currently doing freelance work at researching science quotations for the Oxford English Dictionary. Having a lifelong interest in the subject, she has a degree in astronomy and is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. As well as being assistant librarian for the Society for the History of Astronomy, she is secretary of Leicester Astronomical Society and on the committee for the Commission for Dark Skies. She has been researching Leicestershire astronomers for some years before joining the Society for the History of Astronomy in 2015. In 2014, she first nominated William Parsons, brackets 1767 to 1847, close brackets, for a green plaque for his former residence in South Kilworth in Leicestershire, and also again in 2015 and 2016. By 2017, Parsons was moved up the shortlist and won a public vote. It was agreed to unveil the plaque on the 16th of January 2020, close to the 200th anniversary of the formation of the Royal Astronomical Society. Since joining the Society for the History of Astronomy, she has written several articles for the Bulletin and contributed a chapter for the Society's 20th anniversary booklet, which was recently published. And she was given the Peter Hingley Award in 2019. The title of our presentation this afternoon is William Ludlam, brackets 1717 to 1788, a Leicestershire astronomer. William Ludlam, 1717 to 1788, was born in Leicester and attended Leicester Grammar School and was subsequently St. John's College, Cambridge. He became a fellow in 1744, having been ordained in 1741, and he was rector of Norton by Glanbury, Leicestershire, 1749 to 88, and rector of Cockfield, Suffolk, 1767 to 88. He was director of St. John's Observatory and added astronomical instruments to the church tower at Cockfield. He spent most of his last 20 years of his life in Leicestershire, where he made astronomical observations. In 1785, he wrote Ruminants of Mathematics, a textbook for use in universities. Ludlam was known for his skill in practical mechanics as well as astronomy, and was appointed to the board of longitude in 1765. The same year, he wrote a report on John Harrison's chronometer. His observations in Leicester were published in Physical Transactions, including the 1769 transit of Venus and the solar eclipse in 1778. He used quadrats made by Baird and Hadley and a Ludlam telescope. Ladies and gentlemen, over to Carolyn Bedwell. Carolyn, over to you.
So, thank you, Gerard. Right, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, right. Right. William Ludlam. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to cover his time at Leicester. His time at Cockfield in Suffolk is in this paper in the Journal of the British Astronomical Association, and that goes into the instruments he put on the church tower and trying to track down what happened to some of his instruments. So I'm not going to cover that again. Anyway, this is about William Ludlam, which is Gerard just read out. I should say this is the second Leicester astronomer I have researched called William, whose wife is called Frances, after William Pearson's first wife was called Frances. And the other thing is, a lot of people in this story are called William, and if they're not called William, they're called Thomas. So I'm trying to make sure that don't get too confused with the different names. This is pretty much what Gerard just read out about the summary of William Ludlam's life, and I'll go through these in due course. This is the only picture known of William Ludlam. For some reason, it's in an Oxford college, and he had no connections with Oxford. No one has any idea how a pastel drawing of William Ludlam's in an Oxford college. There's a suggestion that he might have made the clock in a bursar's lodge, but nobody really knows. So there's just a bit about William Ludlam's family. His father, Richard Ludlam, was a surgeon in Leicester. His mother, Anne Dury, was from Nottingham. And William Ludlam here, this is a Leicester family. Joseph Craddock's tomb is actually in what's now called Leicester Cathedral. Frances Dowley, whom he married, was from Daventry in Northamptonshire, and her father was a hat maker. And these are their children. Sadly, Frances outlived both her husband and all her children. Henrietta here is from Warwickshire, so this is really a Midlands family. William Ludlam here became a surgeon. Thomas Ludlam, the older brother, started off as an apprenticeship as a printer, but he eventually became governor of Sierra Leone. And I'll explain more about that later. So let's look at Leicester in William Ludlam's time. If you go there today, this is all built up. It's very different. There's not much left from William Ludlam's time. And this makes a difference because St Martin's, now Leicester Cathedral, was where he was making observations, and it's now completely built up. But as you can see, in his day, there was a clear view of fields to the south. And some of the relevant places here, St Mary de Castro is where he was christened and where he was buried. St Nicholas is one of the older churches in Leicester. And funny enough, St Mary de Castro hasn't lost its spire. St Nicholas has now lost its spire. St Martin's has got remodeled, so that's got a different spire. So things have changed there. And in the background, we have the Charnwood Hills, and Markfield Knoll is not far from the highest point in Leicester, Barden Hill, which also played a role in William Ludlam's work. And the Charnwood Hills have their own history. There were the first Precambrian fossil was found. It's still called Charnia after the Charnwood Hills, and you can find out about that in Leicester Museum and Art Gallery. And it's also David Attenborough's father was principal of the University of Leicester, and David Attenborough used to go to the Charnwood Hills as a boy, and he found fossils there. So the early start as a naturalist. One thing that is remaining here, pretty much as it was in that time, is this folly called Old John, in the shape of a beer mug. It's in Bradgate Park, which was the home of the childhood home of Lady Jane Grey, and the ruins of the Tudor the building is still there, and it's now still a deer park, and it's open to the public to visit. And Old John is actually a place where some of Leicester Astronomical Society have occasionally gone to make astronomical observations. And they go back to William Ludlam was actually living with his brother about here, and this is where Richard III was found, just in the car park just about here. So there's quite a lot of history here, but it's just unrecognizable now. So here we are. William Ludlam went to the grammar school in Leicester, which was started, which dates from Tudor times. Even Queen Elizabeth made a contribution to it. And I haven't been able to find out about much of the curriculum when he was there, but when it was first opened, it was entirely classical, and it started at 5 in the morning in summer and went on until 5 in the evening, and 7 in the morning in summer until 5 in the evening. And on Sundays, the boys were expected to attend church and write a report about the sermons. I think it may have changed a bit then, because William Ludlam certainly had a good knowledge of maths. And nowadays, it's a restaurant. It's still there. It's been changed, but it's been through various uses over the years, but it's now restaurants. You can go in there and have a meal. And this is where William Ludlam was making his observations, Wigston's Hospital. It's built in 1519, and this is the hospital. That's St. Martin's Church. And they were living in the Confrater's house, which is another image just to come. This was set up to house 12 poor men and 12 poor women. Again, it was demolished in 1875, despite a lot of protests. But there's a plaque there marking the place, and it's now a car park. This is where William Ludlam would have been living, because his brother Thomas was also Reverend, was Confrater. It was the Confrater's job to minister to spiritual needs at Wigston's Hospital. And there's this drawing is by John Flower, who did a lot of drawings around Leicester, to give some idea of what it was like in the time. Again, this has completely changed. All these buildings are gone. And a slightly biased view of history here when they say the Greyfriars Church shared the fate of so many religious establishments in the reign of the capricious and tyrannical Henry. The institution, one of the many nobly endowed charities for which we are indebted to our ancestors. Right, St Mary de Castro. Again, one thing about Leicester history from this time is Nichols, The History and Antiquities of the County of Leicester. This is a multi-volume work. It is a massive amount of work. I think it's 4 volumes, and some of them split into 2. But it's got drawings. It's got the inscriptions from graves and so on, which have now vanished. So if you want to find out what Leicester was like beginning of the 19th century, it's an invaluable resource. And this is St Mary de Castro, say 10 years ago. Unfortunately, they had to take the spire down because it became unsafe. But St Mary de Castro is still very much the same inside. And yes, through this, I'll be referring to St Martin's, but that is now Leicester Cathedral. And again, the Victorians rebuilt it. And there's not much of it left. There's some similarity between some of the windows here, but it was completely changed. And it's now going under another renovation. It won't be open again until next year. So if anybody wanted to visit Leicester Cathedral at the moment to see Richard III's grave, it's closed. But Matthew Morris, who was involved in the finding Richard III, has been doing another excavation there. So it'd be interesting to find out find out more about the past of Leicester Cathedral. That's waiting publication. But this is where William Ludlam was living and working. He did have livings at Norton by Golby, which is now called King's Norton, which is to the east of Leicester, and Peckleton for a short time. Interesting, Peckleton car park is somewhere where Leicester Astronomical Society meters, where Leicester Astronomical Society members have gone, because there's slightly darker skies there, so you can do some observations. Right, now, William Ludlam's Leicester connections. This is the record of his baptism in St Mary de Castro, where he says, the son of Dr. Richard Ludlam. And this is a record of his marriage, again in St Martin's this time. And it says Frances Dowley of Daventry, in the county of Northampton. And as I said, her family were in trade. They made hat makers and drapers, that sort of trade. What can be interesting is in these marriage certificates, who are the witnesses? And I think this is Thomas Ludlam, who would have been William Ludlam's brother. And J. Throsby is an antiquarian who's also recording history of Leicester. And this poll book actually shows where William and Thomas Ludlam were living. And there's just a bit about Thomas Ludlam, William's younger brother. He was confrater at Wigston's Hospital for a long time, but that didn't give a very good income. So he was also rector of Foston, Leicestershire, which actually gave him a bit more income. Thomas Ludlam was a theologian, and he and sometimes with William, they wrote religious texts, and they did get into some disputes with other theologians, which I haven't got into all the details of. So, as you'll find out, William Ludlam may have been ordained as a rector, but he didn't actually spend much time in the church. But here's one instance where he was actually conducting a wedding. It was of his niece, but it wasn't in the church that he was actually minister in. But again, on here, we've got his wife, Frances Ludlam, as one of the witnesses, and Benjamin Dowley is Frances's brother. And he was actually working as a hatter in Leicester. And when William Ludlam died in 1788, he was buried in St Mary de Castro. But some years after that, the church was remodeled, and when I went to find the plaque, there's no sign of it. So this is where Nichols' history of Leicestershire comes in very useful, because he recorded it. He recorded what was on that missing plaque, and I don't know about this epitaph, whether epitaph was ever put up there. But again, it gives a record of what people thought about him at the time, and the fact that he was working in science, in astronomy. Right, as I said again, William Ludlam was very much a hands-on mechanic, and he stipulated in his will that his effects should be sold after his death. And the advertisements in the newspaper give an idea of just how much there was there. And it's intriguing just to see these lists. I have no idea what's happened to a lot of these things, or more specific details. If they mention a catalogue, it would be lovely to see a catalogue, but I've never come across one. And after William's brother Thomas died in 1811, again there was a sale of various workshop tools. I mean, a large pair of forged bellows. And I'm just wondering just how much is going on with this in these workshops. So this is some opinions of his contemporaries, because William Ludlam wrote to Erasmus Darwin, and it seems Erasmus Darwin thought highly of Ludlam. But again, he's saying that William Ludlam wasn't really recognised in his time for what he did. And again, right, Reverend Thomas Robinson was a friend of William Ludlam. Edward Thomas Vaughan wrote the story of Thomas Robinson's life. So this is a picture of Thomas Robinson, and this is Edward Thomas Vaughan describing William Ludlam. And it's saying he did not usually go to church even on a Sunday. When he did go, it was generally from the workshop, with his hands and legs, which showed where he had been. But this isn't, William Ludlam may not have gone to church, but from his other writings, he was certainly a religious person. So right, we've got to go through some of the astronomical work. I'm covering observations he made in Leicester. He made some observations in Suffolk, but again, Martin Mobley's written about what happened there. I'm looking at astronomical instruments with John Dolland. It's on the board of longitude. He wrote a maths textbook. He never became a fellow of the Royal Society, but he was elected a member of the American Philosophical Society. As I said, the curate did the work at Norton by Golby. In 1760, William Ludlam was a candidate for the Lucasian share of mathematics. Successor would have been he would have been a successor to Isaac Newton, but he wasn't awarded it. Right. So some of the observations he made. He wasn't a fellow of the Royal Society, but he did have reports published in the Philosophical Transactions. So this is the transit that James Cook was observing from the other side of the world at Tahiti. Meanwhile, William Ludlam, with a Dolan telescope, was making his observations by Woodston Hospital. And one thing he points out is that he doesn't have a fixed observatory. So before he's making his observations, he's using this, he's making measurements with this clock to find out the errors in the time so he can get accurate timing. In the paper, it goes into a fair bit of detail about how he does this. And he did see the transit. And the next day, there was a total eclipse of the sun, which was partial from Leicester. Because as you can see from this diagram, it was total. You had to go to Greenland if you wanted to see the total eclipse, and they weren't many expeditions being sent out to eclipses in those days. But he does record the instruments he used, a Hadley quadrant, and he's making his measurements by reflecting from water, which I haven't actually found a diagram or anything of exactly how this is done. So there are certainly more things to investigate. Again, he's in this recording of the moon observing Zeta Tauri. He makes a comment. He's got no fixed observatory. He's using a Hadley quadrant, and he hasn't got a clock near the telescope, so he's having to use a bell to do the timing. He does say what kind of telescope. It's the same Dolan telescope as previous year. He also records there's some cloud coming across, which is, well, not unusual. And some measurements to record the latitude of Leicester. And here he's using a bird quadrant, measuring the zenith distance. And he notes that in 1769, he measured the latitude of St. Martin's Church, 52 degrees, 37 minutes, 3 seconds. And he feels in 1775, he feels his results are more accurate. He's got 52 degrees, 38 minutes. And this fits in with when I put this in I checked on Google Maps what St Martin's is now, and that 52 degrees 38 minutes 5 seconds. So that's quite close. And another eclipse, partial eclipse from Leicester. So again, he's using quadrants. He's saying he hasn't used it for, he didn't know he hadn't used a quadrant for a while. And again, hazy. But he did know to time the eclipse and compare it with other places, Greenwich, where it was being measured by William Wales in Paris. And this time he calculated the longitude of St Martin's Church and made that 4 minutes, 35 seconds of time, which is about 1 degree. And again, this eclipse was total, but as part of Americas, but somebody had observed it from the middle of the Atlantic. So these are not necessarily easy places to get to, but William Ludlam wouldn't have been able to travel anyway. And so it's not until, as we've just seen, it's not until the next century that they had expeditions to study eclipses. Right, and this map not only shows how much built up Leicester has become since William Ludlam's time. It is just solid housing, buildings, whatever, in the central area now. I put William Ludlam's measurement into Google Maps, and it's pretty close to St Martin's, given the equipment he was using. And yes, the eclipse in 2015, knowing this about William Ludlam, I went and observed it from St Martin's, and this is a kitchen utensil, and I've used it to project the shadow of the eclipse on William Ludlam's 1778 paper, his recording of his observations of the eclipse in the same place. And it's, the shadows are showing the crescent sun. This I found interesting because William Ludlam is wanting to make this work accessible to people. William Byrd made a quadrant at the request of the Board of Longitude, but it was stipulated that he had to produce a document explaining its use. But it was aimed at the people actually making the quadrant. One thing about astronomers at this time, they had to make their own instruments, and it's only in more recent times that the actual workmen and the scientists have more interaction, because astronomers having to make their own instruments, having to learn this themselves. So they were working a lot more with the instrument makers. And William Ludlam was writing this so both groups of people could understand it. And as he said, he attended a dividing of a 40-inch quadrant in 1767. But on finding that he didn't know enough about it, he went back, took notes, and then wrote his tract on dividing astronomical instruments. I also found it interesting that William Byrd started making quadrants after seeing a clock in a shop window where the hours weren't evenly divided, and this annoyed him, but he was able to produce instruments where the divisions were properly done. And John Byrd wrote an acknowledgement in William Ludlam's document on dividing a quadrant. So he was certainly okay with William Ludlam doing this, and they hope it will make it possible for people to do the same. And this is a photo from a visit to the Museum of History of Science in Oxford some years ago of one of John Byrd's quadrants. Also attached to the also attached to William Ludlam's tract on John Bird's quadrant is a English and French vocabulary for astronomical instruments, and he goes through. He puts the French. He has the English and French translations. So saying it's important that when these new instruments are invented, that they have names. Two things I thought was interesting here. He said we have no word in English that answers to the horology. I'm going to get this word right. Anyway, horologery. He says to call it clockery is not in English. So I think it'd be quite a fascinating word to call clockmaking clockery, but it didn't catch on. Another point here, he's saying the English word for vice is spelled V-I-S-E. It should not be spelled V-I-C-E. But these days, this is seen as the American spelling, and this is seen as the English spelling. So you can find from time to time that the so-called Americanizations, actually the English version in the past, this applied with railroad. If you look at 1830s, railroad was commonly used by English engineers, but now that's seen as American. And another quadrant, which William Ludlam wrote about, again, to help other people use it. And the one thing about this, it says it's drawn by WL, so I assume that's William Ludlam. So he provided the drawings for the engraver. And here we come to the board of longitude and John Harrison and chronometers, and that's quite a story with that. I mean, in popular science, you can't sometimes get the impression that John Harrison had a battle with the board of longitude and wasn't treated very fairly, but once his chronometer was invented, that solved the problem. Well, that's not the case at all. This is showing where William Ludlam became involved in 1765, and a whole group to examine John Harrison's chronometer. Actually, he wouldn't have called it a chronometer. It would be called a watch or a timepiece. The word chronometer came in use later. But anyway, these were assigned to examine the chronometer and report back their findings. And here's John Harrison. And William Ludlam, this is an extract from William Ludlam's report, because Harrison listed things that needed to be remedied for the timepiece, and Ludlam goes through them and considers each of John Harrison's potential solutions to the problems. On the whole, he agrees with them, but he does question whether one would actually stand being moved around on a ship, though he has said that it has been on a voyage and seems to be still working, but there's still a question whether how much it would survive motion. The main point he raises is whether the differing temperatures would affect the reliability of the clock. And John Harrison, in a publication called Concerning Such Mechanism, gave his view of his dealings with the board of longitude. He does mention William Ludlam briefly in that, because he has made some derogatory comments about professors and parsons and priests and philosophers and things like that, maybe not knowing their subject. Well, William, from what you see here, William Ludlam knew about clocks. He knew about the mechanisms. He was qualified to comment. So actually, it turns out that the chronometers that were actually used formed the basis for future voyages were by John Arnold and Thomas Earnshaw. John Harrison's chronometer was used by James Cook on a voyage, but it wasn't the forerunner of the chronometers that were used later. John Arnold coined the term chronometer. He made a more simplified version of John Harrison's chronometer, but they were still expensive. But unlike John Harrison's chronometer, they were replicable. You could make copies of them. John Harrison's chronometer, as a paper I read to point out, John Harrison did not solve the problem of longitude. The chronometers contributed, but there's still people using the lunar distances as well. And you couldn't do any of this without a sextant and something like the nautical almanac. But here's William Ludlam. He's saying his first impressions of John Arnold weren't good, but he concludes that he thinks his chronometer will actually be better than that of John Harrison's and more likely to solve the problem. And another person who William Ludlam worked with was John Dolland, who's well known for his telescopes on the achromatic lens. And there's a report here of John Dolland actually thinking quite highly of William Ludlam, one of the list of people here in a biography about him. Again, there are things here which are tantalizing glimpses of in the documents I've read. There are various people who wrote histories of Leicester in the 18th and 19th century. Then they're not specialist scientists. And the report of Ludlam testing lenses on Barden Hill, which is in the charm, which is on that drawing of Leicester I showed earlier, being the highest point in Leicestershire. But there's no more details than that. What lenses he was testing, what he took there, did Dolland accompany him? It'd be intriguing to know. And again, this is a Dolland telescope that's in the museum at Oxford. It's not the one that William Ludlam used, but it's just to show what the telescopes were like. And again, William Ludlam has knowledge of mathematics, and he was concerned that university students had a good introduction to mathematics, and he published this book in 1785, and it went into 5 editions, but it's still being used after his death. This is in the 5th edition. There is a second author on there, but I've cropped it just because it makes the text too small to read if the image is any bigger. All right. Now, William Ludlam also had an interest in music, and I can see here he's listed. He played the organ at St Martin's, and with any appeal of bells, there were all sorts of issues because they'd play the bells, and no one could agree whether they were in tune or not, and there was quite a bit of problem making sure that people would agree about retuning the bells, and eventually decided it's better to have one person just saying whether the bells are in tune or not a whole group. William Gardner, who was a Leicester musician, recalls meeting William Ludlam, knowing William Ludlam when he was a child. And William Gardner, as a child, was known to be a good musician. There were 2 teachers of harpsichord in Leicester, and they wouldn't take him on because they knew he was good, and I think they were concerned that he'd be a rival for their income. But he made this account of William Ludlam. William Ludlam meeting William Gardner as a child, and he let William Gardner into the church, and then he started playing the organ and making a game of it, and I thought it was quite endearing that he had the time to do that for a child. See, William Gardner is a quite interesting person, and there may be some more to follow up in the history of astronomy with him, because he He's best known for introducing Beethoven's music to the UK. The first piece of Beethoven's music came in a violin case from a refugee who ended up in Leicester. And in his autobiography, William Gardner describes a lot of the people he knew in his life, and he was very interested in astronomy, and he's taking a different perspective on this. Look at the astronomers and musicians, and so they had the astronomy and the music in common. And through his friendship with Thomas Greatorex, he visited William Herschel at Slough. And this is where it gets a bit tantalizing, because he described Thomas Tomkinson as a piano maker, as an astronomer. I've looked into this, but Thomas Tomkinson, there are 3 ways of spelling his name, and no further mention of whatever he may have done about astronomer. I don't know whether William Gardner met William Pearson, but he described Pearson's telescope at South Kilworth in Music and Friends. And he also named 2 amateur astronomers in Leicester, Samuel Miles and Mr. Mattock. And again, is there more to be found out of what they were doing? And William Gardner's father, he saw Hallett's comet twice. He also saw a great comet between 1759 and 1835. So again, this is not the only astronomers to be both musicians and astronomers. Another aspect of William Ludlam's life, towards the end of his life, certainly in Leicester, this is becoming a matter of the abolition of slavery. And this is an extract from a letter he wrote. And he's saying, we can allege no facts, but those whose notoriety makes them unquestionable. We know that the Negroes are forced by violence in their native country. We know that this violence is encouraged, is not wholly upheld by the dealers in this traffic. He's saying we need to stick to the facts, not just personal experience. And though he wasn't actually able to get to the meeting, it's reported in this book that this letter had an effect to make a strong petition at the time. Of course, but when William Ludlam died in 1788, it was a long time before anything actually happened. But the very influential son, Thomas Ludlam, also called Thomas Ludlam, started out as a printer, but he joined the Sierra Leone Company, where a group of abolitionists were trying to set up a settlement for former slaves in Sierra Leone. It was quite idealistic. In practice, it didn't quite work as well as they'd hoped. There were some things that it did do. They set up local council for the people living there, and anyone who was head of a household could vote. And some women were head of households. So this is the first time that women could vote for a public body, and they were former slaves. But organisation of it and different opinions and so on, eventually the government had to take over. And but as you can see, before that happened, there were various governors here only as part of Sierra Leone as part of this company. And this is where William Ludlam's son met William Rutter Dawes' father, because they both alternated as governors. And this is one of the reasons William Rutter Dawes was staying with relatives, not with his father, because William Dawes, he came to Sierra Leone from Australia, and he spent some time in London after leaving Australia, and then came out to Sierra Leone, and then he went to Antigua, which meant William Rutter Dawes was living with relatives and then with his tutor. And sadly, after Thomas Ludlam's final time as governor, he was commissioned to go and explore the local area, but he caught a fever and died on the frigate in 1810. And as I say, I've been trying to not to put up slides where you say, sorry, you can't read this at the back. But with this, if you're standing under it at the church, in the church, it is actually very difficult to read. There's this plaque high up on the wall commemorating Thomas Ludlam. The plaque to William Ludlam, his father's, disappeared. But William Ludlam's wife, Frances, put up this plaque, commissioned this plaque to commemorate her son. And it does mention William Ludlam. So he's still mentioned in St. Mary de Castro, where he was baptized and where he was buried. And the text is mainly about Thomas, though. His unwearied and judicious labours to promote the best interest of the natives of America will not be forgotten by the friends of this deeply injured race.
Renee?
And entitle him.
Renee?
And entitle him to be a distinguished place among their benefactors. His life was short, but in that short life he did much for God and man. So we don't have time. So, well, that's an outline of some of William Ludlam's life. As you can see, there's a lot more that could be told, and there isn't, so far as I can tell, other than these particular accounts, a detailed account of his life. He's in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, and this is from a perspective of mathematics. I do think with William Ludlam, possibly William Gardner, some of these other people, there's potential for more research. So, well, that's the end of my talk.
Okay, Carolyn, thank you very much. It's a fine example of finding someone, obviously in your local area, and piecing together his life and obviously his astronomical connections.
Could you unshare your screen, Carolyn?
Yep.
There's a
Stop share. Yes, all that. Yes, that button saying stop share.
there's a message from David Sellers for you. A fascinating talk, Carolyn. A 4-page slide, a sale catalogue of William Ludlam's instruments, etc., is transcribed in a PDF file on Oxford Museum of the History of Science website, and he's actually put up the link for you on.
Yes, I've just got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So,
That's what I was wanting to find out more detail, because those newspaper reports are tantalising. What is it?
Okay. Are there any questions for Carolyn, please, from our audience? Let me just put the camera. Anybody? Sorry. No hands. Oh, there's a raised hand. Kevin, over to you.
Yes. Thinking back to my days where I worked at the Science Museum, I got the feeling, I seem to remember this, there was a quadrant that was allegedly used or the property of William Ludlam that came to the museum via the University Observatory, Cambridge. Fortunately, I've just been searching their site and I can't find reference to it. But it might be worth trying the Science Museum to, because I've got a feeling it came to the museum in the 1930s. I'm just wondering whether it's a loan instrument and as such isn't therefore posted. But there is actually a diagram of it, I believe, that I remember speaking to the late Dewhurst, which they actually gave us a copy of the collections. It's on the technical files, but I'm pretty sure it was I think it was from when he was the director of the observatory to Cambridge St John's College. But I can't find any reference to it directly. There is a mention of a quadrant in Gunter's work on the early science at Cambridge. So maybe that's the instrument, because of course this book was published in 1937. So it may have then come to the museum since then. But it was in the possession of the university, and I can't remember who actually. I did look it up. I can't remember who actually donated it to the university, the observatory. I mean,
There's quite a gap between William Ludlam dying in in 1788 and turning up, when was it, at the university? Say 1930. Yeah. Would it be possible to trace it all the way back that far?
Possibly. But there were some other things that came to the observatory as well. So, but I think it was in the time of Woolley, when he was director there, that the actual, from my memory of reading the files.
Okay.
Any more questions from anybody, please? Anybody? Nothing on. Okay. In spite of us not being in Birmingham face to face, we are going to have a short break now, and